The afternoon sun hung low over the quiet countryside highway, painting everything in warm shades of gold. The air shimmered above the road, and the only sounds were the rhythmic hum of tires on asphalt and the whisper of wind brushing across the fields. Ethan Miller, a 34-year-old car mechanic, was driving back home after dropping off a client's car. His old pickup rattled slightly, the radio humming an old country song. It was an ordinary day, the kind of day that slips by without notice, until a sudden, sharp screech cut through the calm. Ethan's hands gripped the steering wheel. He saw a small blur dart across the road just ahead. For a split second, he thought it was a paper bag caught in the breeze, but then he heard it, a faint, high-pitched whimper, the kind that pierces right through your chest. Without thinking, Ethan slammed the brakes. The truck skidded a few feet before coming to a stop. Behind him, a horn blared from another car, but he didn't care. He threw open the door and ran toward the shoulder of the road. Scanning the ground in a panicked at first, there was nothing. The grass on the roadside was tall, bending softly in the wind. Then, as he crouched down, something moved, a tiny shape half hidden under a clump of dry weeds. Ethan's heart clenched when he saw it. It was a puppy, so small he could have fit in one of Ethan's hands. Its fur was tangled with dust and twigs, and its little chest rose and fell to fast. Its ears twitched weakly, and its paws trembled. "Oh, you poor thing," Ethan whispered, kneeling beside it. He looked around. No other animals, no mother dog, no signs of an owner. The road stretched out empty in both directions. Only the endless hum of engines in the distance broke the silence. He could tell the puppy had been out here for a while, alone, frightened, and hungry. When he reached to pick it up, the puppy flinched and gave a soft growl, more like a frightened hiss than a bark. Hey, it's okay," Ethan said softly, lowering his voice as if talking to a child. "I'm not gonna hurt you." He took off his denim jacket and carefully wrapped it around the little creature. The puppy struggled for a second, then went limp, its head resting against his palm. The moment Ethan felt its heartbeat fluttering against his hand, something inside him shifted. It wasn't just sympathy. It was a sudden, fierce need to protect this helpless thing. He had no idea why. Maybe it was because of the silence in those eyes to deep and to knowing for something so small. He carried the puppy back to the truck. A few people passing by slowed down, curious to see what he was holding, but Ethan ignored them. He set the puppy gently on the passenger seat, where it curled into the jacket, eyes half closed. Dust from the road swirled in the sunlight as Ethan climbed back in, shutting the door quietly, as if afraid to wake it. "Hang in there, little guy," he murmured, starting the engine. "We'll get you cleaned up. You're safe now." The drive back to town took 20 minutes, but Ethan drove slower than usual. Every few minutes, he glanced over to check if the puppy was breathing. Once, he thought it had stopped, but then he saw its tiny chest rise again, steady but faint. The sight made him exhale in relief. Ethan wasn't the kind of man who talked much about feelings. He worked long hours fixing cars, spent weekends alone fishing or watching old action movies. His life had been simple, almost empty since his father's passing 2 years ago. But, as he looked at the fragile creature beside him, something inside him stirred, something warm and unfamiliar. When he reached his small house on the edge of town, the puppy opened its eyes again, blinking against the light. Ethan smiled. "Welcome home, buddy," he said softly, even though he knew it wasn't really a home yet. Just a garage that smelled of oil and iron, with tools hanging neatly on the walls. But to him, that little space was everything. He placed the jacket on a soft towel near his workbench and filled a small bowl with water. The puppy sniffed it but didn't drink at first. Ethan dipped his fingers in the water and let a few drops fall on the puppy's nose. That seemed to work. Soon it began to lap slowly, clumsy but determined. Ethan found an old carton of milk in the fridge and poured some into a shallow dish. The puppy drank until its tiny belly looked round. As it ate, Ethan noticed things that made him curious. Its fur wasn't quite like any breed he'd seen. It had golden brown patches, but the pattern was strange, more wild than domestic. Its ears were small and slightly pointed, its eyes sharp even though it was weak. There was something unusual about it, but Ethan brushed the thought aside. Maybe it was just a mixed breed stray. When the puppy finally curled up and fell asleep on the towel, Ethan sat nearby, just watching. The faint rhythm of its breathing filled the quiet room. Outside, the late-day sun poured through the window, casting soft beams over the metal tools and the tiny creature lying in the middle of them. It was the most peaceful sight Ethan had seen in years. He reached out and gently stroked its head. The puppy stirred but didn't wake. Its fur was softer than he expected. "You're safe now," Ethan whispered again. "No more roads. No more fear. I got you." As the evening light began to fade, Ethan leaned back in his chair, exhausted but content. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring, or why fate had led him down that stretch of road at just the right moment. But deep down, he felt that saving this puppy wasn't an accident. It felt meant to be. He looked once more at the sleeping animal and smiled. "You need a name, huh?" he murmured. "Let's call you Scout." The puppy's tail twitched slightly, as if approving. Ethan chuckled quietly, unaware that this simple act of kindness, stopping his truck for a small creature on the road, would soon pull him into a mystery far bigger than he could imagine. For now, though, the world was quiet. Just a man, a rescued life, and the faint hope that tomorrow would be better than today. The morning sun crept through the cracks in the old garage windows, spilling soft golden light across Ethan's workbench. Dust motes danced lazily in the air, swirling above half-finished engines, toolboxes, and old car parts stacked like forgotten memories. The quiet hum of the countryside filled the space. Birds outside, the distant rumble of a tractor, the faint hiss of wind slipping under the door. Ethan stood at the counter, pouring himself a cup of coffee, still half asleep but feeling a calm sense of purpose. For the first time in a long while, he wasn't alone. On a folded towel near the tool rack, the tiny puppy, Scout, slept peacefully, his small chest rising and falling in a steady rhythm that felt almost musical against the silence. Ethan smiled as he watched the little creature stir awake, blinking gradually at the morning light. "Good morning, buddy," he said softly, setting down his coffee. Scout yawned, stretched his tiny legs, and let out a faint squeak, though it didn't sound quite like a bark. Ethan laughed quietly. "Guess you're not much of a talker yet." He crouched beside the pup, offering a shallow bowl of milk and some crumbled bits of bread. The puppy sniffed, then began to eat with surprising strength for something so small. Ethan felt a strange warmth in his chest as he watched. He had rescued animals before, injured birds, once a cat that got stuck under his truck, but this felt different. There was a connection here, one that made no sense, but felt undeniably real. The way Scout looked at him, with eyes that seemed older than his tiny body, gave Ethan a strange comfort, as if the puppy understood something unspoken. Hours passed quietly. Ethan worked on a car engine, occasionally glancing over to make sure Scout was still resting. Every now and then, he'd catch the puppy watching him, eyes following his every move, studying him intently. It was a little eerie but also fascinating. Most puppies were clumsy, playful, and noisy, but Scout was calm, silent, and sharp. He didn't chase the screws Ethan dropped, didn't bark when tools clanked loudly on the floor. Instead, he simply observed, still as a statue, his gaze never missing a thing. By noon, Ethan decided it was time for Scout's first bath. He filled a small plastic basin with warm water and carried it to the workbench. "All right, little man, let's get you cleaned up," he said, dipping his fingers to test the temperature. Scout tilted his head, but didn't resist as Ethan gently lowered him into the water. The dust and dirt from the road began to wash away, revealing soft fur that gleamed golden brown under the light. Ethan chuckled softly. "Look at you, handsome guy now." But as he ran his fingers through the fur, he noticed something odd. The hair along the pup's spine was thicker, darker, almost forming a faint stripe that ran to the tail. The paws looked stronger too, the claws sharper, more developed than any puppies he had seen. When Ethan lifted Scout out of the basin and wrapped him in a towel, the puppy gave a tiny shiver but didn't whimper. He just looked up with those sharp eyes, calm and unafraid. "You're a tough one," Ethan said quietly, drying him carefully. He placed the pup on the floor, expecting him to stumble or wobble like a normal young dog. But Scout stood firm on his legs, perfectly balanced. He even took a few confident steps, sniffing the corners of the garage. Tail low, movements smooth and precise. Ethan frowned, half amused, half confused. "You sure you're a puppy?" he muttered. Scout glanced back, as if answering the question with a silent stare. For a moment, their eyes locked, and Ethan felt something unsettling, a flicker of wildness in those amber eyes, something raw and ancient. But it vanished as quickly as it came, replaced by the innocent curiosity of a young animal. That afternoon, Ethan took Scout outside for a bit of sun. His house backed onto open fields that stretched to the woods beyond. The air smelled of cut grass and gasoline from his nearby garage. Scout trotted beside him, exploring every patch of dirt and sniffing at the weeds. A few neighbors passed by, waving. "Hey Ethan, found yourself a new friend," one called out. Ethan grinned. "Guess so," he replied, scratching Scout's head. The neighbor laughed. "Cute pup. What breed?" Ethan hesitated, looking down at Scout. "Not sure," he admitted. "Found him on the highway. Poor thing almost didn't make it." Later, after Scout had eaten again, Ethan sat at his small kitchen table scrolling through his phone. He opened a local animal rescue group on Facebook and posted a picture. "Found this puppy near Route 19 yesterday afternoon. Anyone recognize him?" He stared at the photo before hitting post. The puppy's face looked almost too sharp, the eyes glinting oddly in the light. But Ethan shrugged it off. Puppies always looked a little strange when scared. He set his phone aside and turned to find Scout watching him again from the doorway. Silent, patient, as if waiting for something. As the day drifted into evening, the golden light turned orange and stretched long shadows across the room. Ethan began to clean up his tools, humming softly to himself. That's when he heard it, a faint scratching sound. It came from behind the shelves where he kept his spare tires. He walked over, curious, and found Scout halfway up the stack, climbing as if it were nothing. "Hey," Ethan exclaimed, surprised. "How did you?" The puppy froze for a second, staring down at him, then leapt gracefully to the floor, landing without a sound. Ethan blinked in disbelief. "Well, that's new," he muttered. Scout wagged his tail slightly, looking proud of himself. Though his movements were strangely graceful, too smooth for such a young pup. That night, Ethan tried to sleep, but the memory of that leap played over and over in his mind. He had seen plenty of dogs, but never one that moved like that, quick, light, controlled. Still, he told himself it was just adrenaline, maybe leftover fear from the highway. Animals behave strangely after trauma, right? He rolled over and tried to relax. From the corner of the room, he could hear Scout breathing softly, curled up near his bed. The sound was steady and calming, but sometime after midnight, Ethan woke to silence. The breathing was gone. He turned on the bedside lamp and scanned the floor. The puppy wasn't there. Heart pounding. He got up and looked around. Then he saw it. Scout perched quietly on the windowsill, staring out into the moonlit fields. His small body was still, ears pointed forward, eyes gleaming in the faint light. Ethan walked over slowly. "What are you looking at, boy?" he whispered. Scout didn't move for a long time. Then, as if realizing Ethan was there, he turned his head and gave a tiny sound. Not quite a bark, not quite a whine. It was something else. Something deep and haunting. Ethan stood frozen. The puppy's eyes reflected the light like amber glass, bright and sharp. For the first time, a chill crept up his spine. Something about this small creature didn't feel ordinary anymore. He reached out his hand, and Scout stepped down, calm again, curling by his bed as if nothing had happened. Ethan sat beside him, unsure of what he'd just seen. Maybe it was just his imagination, he thought. Maybe he was tired. As the night deepened, Ethan finally drifted back to sleep with Scout beside him, unaware that his simple act of kindness had already set something in motion. Something wild, something hidden, that would soon change both their lives forever. The next morning arrived bright and calm. sunlight spilling through the windows like liquid gold. The air smelled faintly of oil, metal, and warm bread. Ethan had woken early, still thinking about what he saw the night before, the image of Scout perched silently on the windowsill, gazing into the darkness like something ancient and wild. He had told himself it was nothing, just a weird moment that came from being tired. But deep down, something about it lingered in his chest like a quiet drumbeat. There was something different about that puppy. He made breakfast, toast, scrambled eggs, black coffee, and poured a little milk into a small bowl for Scout. The puppy trotted over with quick, graceful steps, tail wagging only once or twice. Ethan couldn't help smiling. "Morning, partner," he said, setting the bowl down. Scout lapped it up quietly, then sat back, watching Ethan with those same sharp amber eyes. There was intelligence in that gaze, far beyond what he'd seen in most dogs. It wasn't fear or confusion, it was curiosity, focus, awareness. It was almost human. After breakfast, Ethan decided to give Scout some fresh air. The day was bright, the sky stretched wide and blue, and the field shimmered in the sunlight. He grabbed his cap, whistled lightly, and opened the garage door. Scout padded out beside him, sniffing the grass, tail low but alert. A breeze rolled across the open land, carrying the soft scent of wildflowers and fresh soil. It was peaceful, until a sudden bark echoed from across the road. Ethan looked up and saw his neighbor's dog, a big Labrador named Duke, bounding toward the fence, tail wagging. Duke was friendly, the kind that barked at everyone just to say hello. But when Scout noticed him, the air shifted. The puppy didn't bark or back away. Instead, he went still. His body lowered slightly, muscles tightening, his eyes locked on the Labrador like a hunter watching prey. The fur along his back bristled. Ethan frowned. Hey, it's okay," he said quickly, stepping in front of him. "He's just saying hi." Scout didn't growl, but his stare didn't break either. For a full minute, he watched Duke with a quiet intensity that made the larger dog suddenly stop wagging his tail. Duke whimpered and backed away from the fence, turning and trotting back toward his yard. Ethan's heart thumped. He'd never seen anything like it. A tiny pup making a full-grown dog retreat without a sound. When he looked down again, Scout had relaxed, tail wagging as if nothing had happened. He nudged Ethan gently, playful again. "That was weird," Ethan murmured, half smiling, half worried. He tried to shrug it off. Maybe Scout had been scared. Maybe Duke's size intimidated him. But no, that wasn't fear. It was control. It was something older, something instinctive. Later that day, Ethan sat on his porch while Scout napped in a patch of sunlight nearby. He pulled out his phone and opened the rescue post he'd made online. Still no replies. Not a single person had claimed the puppy. Dozens of likes and comments said how cute the animal looked, but no one recognized it. He even checked with local shelters and vets, but nothing matched the description. "You just dropped out of nowhere, huh?" Ethan said softly, glancing at Scout. By late afternoon, he decided to give Scout a quick check himself. He'd grown up around animals and knew a few basic things. He looked at the paws, stronger than normal, the pads rougher, more developed. The teeth were sharper, more pointed. Even the ears, though soft, were shaped slightly different, more triangular. The more he looked, the less he saw a typical puppy. But every time he started to question it, Scout would lick his hand or tilt his head in such a loving, innocent way that Ethan's doubts melted away. "You're just special, that's all," he told him with a chuckle. That evening, as the light faded, Ethan went into town to grab some groceries. He left Scout in the garage with a bowl of water and a blanket. When he returned about an hour later, he noticed something strange the moment he stepped inside, the faint smell of earth and leaves. He followed the scent to the back door. It was slightly open, even though he was sure he'd closed it. His stomach tightened. "Scout," he called out, voice echoing in the quiet. He walked around the corner and froze. Scout was sitting in the middle of the floor, calm and still, a small twig caught in his fur and dirt on his paws. He had clearly been outside, but somehow had come back before Ethan returned. "How did you?" Ethan muttered, confused. The latch on the back door was higher than the pup could reach. He kneeled, checking the lock. It wasn't broken or scratched. Somehow, the puppy had managed to nudge it open. That shouldn't have been possible. Ethan exhaled slowly, shaking his head. "You're full of surprises, aren't you?" he said, half laughing, though unease crawled at the edge of his thoughts. He cleaned Scout's paws and settled him near the blanket again. The puppy curled up quickly, looking peaceful, as if nothing unusual had happened. That night, Ethan couldn't sleep easily. He lay awake, the fan turning slowly above, the sound of crickets echoing outside. His mind kept circling back to the day's strange events, the stare down with the Labrador, the sharp teeth, the open door. He turned on his side, watching Scout's small shape in the dim light. The puppy's breathing was steady, his fur rising and falling with each slow breath. There was nothing threatening about him now, nothing at all. And yet, Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that he was caring for something he didn't fully understand. The next morning, he made a decision. He needed answers. He'd take Scout to a veterinarian in town for a checkup, maybe even a DNA test if they offered one. There was nothing wrong with wanting to be sure, right? He told himself it was just for peace of mind, but a part of him already feared what the results might say. When he picked Scout up, the puppy didn't resist. He just looked up at Ethan with quiet trust. The morning sun glowed across the fields as they drove off in the truck. Scout rested on Ethan's lap, head poking out the open window, ears flicking in the wind. People smiled as they passed by, a man and his adorable rescue puppy, a heartwarming sight on a sunny day. But Ethan kept glancing down, noticing how the little creature's eyes moved, sharp, alert, never missing a thing. The truck bounced over the last hill before town, the vet's clinic coming into view. Ethan's fingers tightened on the steering wheel. "We're just making sure you're okay," he said quietly. "Nothing to worry about." Scout gave a soft sound, not quite a bark, more of a low, gentle hum. It was almost as if he understood. As they pulled into the parking lot, Ethan couldn't help but smile again. Whatever Scout was, dog or something else, he had already taken up a place in Ethan's heart that felt impossible to undo. He carried the puppy toward the glass doors, unaware that in just a few minutes, everything he believed about the little creature, and about what he had saved on that highway, was about to change forever. Asterisk. The morning sun poured through the windshield as Ethan's old pickup rumbled down the small town main street. The golden light glinted off the truck's hood, and the wine carried the faint smell of coffee and gasoline through the open window. Scout sat quietly on Ethan's lap, his head poking out just far enough to feel the breeze. The little creature seemed almost too calm, watching everything with those sharp, thoughtful eyes that no longer looked like those of an ordinary puppy. Ethan had brushed the fur and wrapped him in a soft towel, wanting the vet to see that he'd been cared for. Still, he couldn't shake the nervous feeling building in his stomach. Something told him that this visit would give him answers he wasn't entirely ready to hear. He parked in front of the Maple Grove Veterinary Clinic, a small brick building with white shutters and a cheerful blue sign shaped like a paw print. A bell chimed softly as Ethan pushed open the door, and the familiar smell of disinfectant and pet shampoo filled the air. Behind the counter, Dr. Karen Holt, a woman in her early 50s with gentle eyes and a steady voice, greeted him with a smile. "Good morning, Ethan. What brings you in today?" she asked. Ethan adjusted Scout in his arms, who blinked curiously at the new surroundings. "Found this little guy on the highway a couple of days ago," Ethan said. "He was in bad shape, but he's doing better now. I just wanted to make sure he's healthy, and maybe find out what breed he is. He's a bit different." Dr. Holt stepped around the counter, her practiced hands already reaching out. "Let's take a look at you, little one," she said warmly. Scout's ears twitched, but he didn't struggle as she gently took him and placed him on the metal exam table. The sound of claws against steel echoed softly through the quiet room. The vet smiled, but something in her eyes changed almost instantly, the way a doctor's expression shifts when instinct warns them something is off. She began the routine examination, her movements slow and careful. She listened to Scout's heartbeat, checked his eyes, teeth, and pause. For a while, the only sounds were the clicking of tools and the soft hum of the air conditioner. Ethan stood by the wall, hands in his pockets, watching quietly. "He's been calm since I found him," Ethan said. "Eats well, plays a bit, sleeps a lot, but he doesn't bark, doesn't act scared, just watches." Dr. Holt didn't respond right away. Her brow furrowed as she examined Scout's teeth more closely. "You said you found him on the highway?" she asked. "Yeah, right near Route 19, Ethan replied. "Thought he was a stray." The vet exhaled slowly. "You were lucky to find him when you did. He's strong for his size, but something about these teeth." She trailed off, moving to part the fur on the back of his neck. Ethan noticed her hand hesitate. The soft fur gave way to a thicker patch, coarse, almost like that of a wild animal. The vet ran her fingers along the ridge of Scout's back, then stepped back suddenly, her face tightening. Ethan frowned. "What is it?" Dr. Holt swallowed hard. "Ethan," she said carefully, her voice slower now, This isn't a puppy." For a second, the words didn't make sense. Ethan laughed softly, confused. "What do you mean? Of course he's a puppy. Just look at him." The vet shook her head. "No, look at the bone structure, the shape of the skull, the teeth, and those eyes." She turned toward him, her face pale. "This is not a domestic dog. This is a wolf cub." Ethan blinked, stunned into silence. A wolf. He looked down at the small creature sitting calmly on the table. Scout tilted his head, watching both of them as if he understood every word. "That can't be. He's tiny. I mean, wolves don't look like this, do they?" Dr. Holt sighed. "They do, when they're young. And this one?" She hesitated, studying the markings along Scout's fur. "Isn't from around here. These patterns are typical of northern breeds, gray wolves, maybe even hybrids bred illegally. I've heard rumors lately, smugglers transporting exotic animals through nearby highways. Sometimes they dump the young ones if they get scared of getting caught." Ethan felt his throat tighten. He ran a hand through his hair, staring at Scout in disbelief. "You're saying someone was smuggling him?" "It's very possible," the vet replied. "And if that's the case, you did the right thing by bringing him here." "But Ethan," she looked at him with concern, "you can't keep him. It's against state law to own a wild animal, even if it seems tame. He might be young now, but as he grows, his instincts will change. Wolves don't stay domestic. They follow their nature." Ethan's stomach turned. He looked at Scout, who sat quietly, those amber eyes still locked on him, trusting, almost affectionate. The idea of handing him over to strangers made his chest ache. "What's going to happen to him?" he asked. Dr. Holt softened her voice. "We'll contact the Wildlife Rescue Center. They'll take good care of him. They can raise him safely. Maybe release him into a protected area when he's ready. It's what's best for him." Ethan nodded slowly, his heart heavy. He reached out, and Scout pressed his nose into his palm. The warmth of that small gesture nearly broke him. He didn't care if the animal was a dog, a wolf, or something in between. He'd saved his life. That connection felt real, deeper than anything he'd felt in years. Dr. Holt turned to her computer, typing up the transfer form. "You should be proud," she said softly. Most people would have just driven past. Ethan gave a faint smile, though his eyes were fixed on the table. "Yeah, but now I've got to let him go." When she stepped out to make a call to the rescue center, Ethan leaned down and lifted Scout into his arms. The cub didn't resist, just curled against him, calm and trusting as ever. Ethan whispered, "You hear that, little guy? You're a wolf. Guess that makes you even braver than I thought." The puppy licked his thumb gently, and Ethan felt a lump form in his throat. Outside, the afternoon light had turned soft and golden. Ethan stood by his truck, Scout in his arms, both of them silent. For a long moment, he didn't move. The vet's words echoed in his mind, but so did the faint heartbeat against his chest. Finally, he whispered, "Whatever you are, you're safe now. I promise that, and I'll keep it." As he drove home, the wind carried through the open window again, ruffling Scout's fur. The little wolf cub stared out at the passing fields, eyes glowing in the sunlight, and Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that their story was far from over. that saving him on the road had been no accident, but the beginning of something neither of them yet understood. Ethan drove home from the clinic in complete silence. The golden afternoon sun washed over the fields, but he barely noticed. His hands rested on the steering wheel, his mind turning over every word the vet had said. A wolf cub. The phrase echoed in his head, over and over, each repetition heavier than the last. Scout, the small trembling puppy he had rescued from the roadside, wasn't a lost pet at all. He was wild, a creature that belonged to forests and mountains, not to the oil-scented walls of a mechanic's garage. Ethan felt a knot form in his chest, a mix of disbelief, sadness, and something else he couldn't name. The tiny animal on the seat beside him looked up with calm, intelligent eyes, unaware of the weight those words carried. When he pulled into the driveway, the truck's tires crunched over the gravel, breaking the stillness. Ethan shut off the engine and sat there for a moment, staring out through the windshield at the old farmhouse. Everything looked the same: the rusted mailbox, the tall oak tree, the tools scattered on the porch, but somehow, it all felt different now. He turned his head toward Scout, who tilted his head curiously as if waiting for some unspoken decision. "You heard her," Ethan said softly, his voice rough with emotion. "You're not a dog. You're something wilder." The little cub blinked and rested his chin on Ethan's arm. "Yeah," Ethan whispered. "I don't believe it either." Inside the house, the air was cool and quiet. Ethan set Scout down on the wooden floor, and the cub padded around confidently, nose twitching as he explored. He moved differently now that Ethan knew what he was. Every step silent, every glance precise. Ethan found himself studying him with new eyes. The shape of his body, the faint stripe along his back, the sharper curve of his ears, all clues he had missed before. How had he not seen it? And yet, even as his mind tried to process it, his heart refused to treat Scout any differently. He was still the same creature Ethan had carried off the road, the same life he had saved. That truth mattered more than what species he was. As the afternoon wore on, Ethan sat on the porch steps, staring out toward the distant line of trees that marked the start of the woods. The wind rustled the grass, and somewhere in the distance, a bird called. Scout sat beside him, resting his head on Ethan's boot. "They want to take you to some wildlife place," Ethan said quietly. "They probably have fences and cages. They'll say it's for your own good. Maybe it is. Maybe that's where you belong." He paused, rubbing a hand across his tired face. "But part of me feels like you belong here, like you were meant to end up on that road, right in front of me." He thought back to the day he found him, the screech of the tires, the tiny trembling body under the weeds, those eyes that didn't seem afraid at all. Everything about it had felt like fate. He remembered what the vet had said about smugglers dumping animals when things got risky. The thought made his jaw tighten. Somewhere out there, people had taken wild creatures from their homes, turned them into cargo, and thrown them away when it became inconvenient. The image filled Ethan with quiet anger. He looked down at Scout, who now gazed up at him with that same calm, watchful expression. "You've been through more than I thought, haven't you, boy?" That night, Ethan couldn't sleep. He lay on the couch with the television flickering soundlessly in the background while Scout dozed on the rug. The small animal looked peaceful, but every so often, his paws twitched as if running in a dream. Ethan wondered what those dreams were: flashes of trees, snow, other voices calling in the dark. Maybe the cub remembered a mother he'd lost, or a home he'd never get back. The thought made Ethan's chest ache. He turned off the TV and sat in the quiet, the only sound the steady rhythm of Scout's breathing. "I'm not ready to let you go," he whispered into the darkness. The following morning, he drove back to the vet's office to finalize the papers for the wildlife transfer. He didn't want to, but he knew he had to. Laws were laws, and he wasn't the kind of man to break them, or at least, he hadn't been. As he walked inside, Dr. Holt greeted him with a look of sympathy. "The rescue center will send someone tomorrow," she said gently. "They'll pick him up from your place. It's the safest way." Ethan nodded, unable to find words. He turned to leave, but she added softly, "You've done a good thing, Ethan. Not everyone would have cared this much." He drove home slower than usual, each mile feeling heavier. When he opened the door, Scout ran to him, tail swishing, eyes bright with trust. Ethan crouched and scooped him into his arms, holding him close. "I don't know if I can do this," he murmured. Scout licked his chin, and Ethan let out a shaky laugh. "Yeah, I know. I'm a fool for getting attached." He carried him outside and sat beneath the oak tree. The afternoon sunlight filtered through the leaves, scattering golden patches across the ground. For a long time, he just sat there with Scout in his lap, feeling the soft rise and fall of his breathing. Later, that day, he opened his laptop and began searching. Wolf Rescue Centers near Maple Grove, he typed. The results showed photos of fenced sanctuaries, volunteers smiling, wild animals pacing behind wire. Ethan clicked through them slowly, his heart sinking further with each image. Scout would survive there, maybe even thrive, but he'd never be free. He'd spend his life behind barriers, safe but caged. The thought twisted something deep inside him. Evening came, painting the sky in soft orange light. Ethan stood at the edge of the field, Scout sitting quietly at his feet. The cub looked toward the woods, nose lifted as if catching a scent on the wind. It was the first time Ethan had seen him look truly alive, not just curious, but connected to something beyond the human world. "You miss it, don't you?" Ethan said softly. The wild. Scout didn't move, just kept staring toward the trees. Ethan knelt and placed a hand on his fur. "They'll come tomorrow," he whispered. "Maybe that's for the best, but just so you know. If I could, I'd take you out there myself and let you run until you found home again." His throat tightened, and his voice broke a little. "You deserve that kind of freedom." That night, the stars shone bright and clear above the farmhouse. Ethan sat by the window long after Scout had fallen asleep, thinking about choices and consequences, about loss and love, about how sometimes doing the right thing felt like breaking your own heart. When he finally drifted off, he dreamed of running, through trees and moonlight, with a small golden shape racing beside him, free and fearless. And when dawn came, the world outside seemed impossibly still, as if it, too, was waiting to see what choice he would make when the rescue van arrived. The morning came softly, with a pale gold light spilling over the horizon and stretching long shadows across the fields. The air was crisp, the kind that carried both peace and the quiet ache of endings. Ethan stood by the window, holding a cup of coffee that had long gone cold. He hadn't slept much. His thoughts had wandered through every memory of the last few days. The moment he found Scout trembling by the roadside, the way the tiny creature had looked up at him with those amber eyes full of trust, and the vet's trembling words, "This isn't a dog." Those words had changed everything, but they had also made Ethan realize something he hadn't wanted to face. Sometimes love meant setting something free, not keeping it close. Scout lay curled on the couch, still asleep. The morning light painted his fur in shades of gold and silver, making him look like a small piece of the sun itself. His chest rose and fell in a steady rhythm, calm and innocent, completely unaware that this would be his last morning in the only home he'd known. Ethan watched him for a long time, trying to memorize every small detail, the way his ears twitched when he dreamed, the faint dark stripe running down his back, the way his paws would stretch out when he yawned. He knew that when the rescue people came, those little things would be all he'd have left. By mid-morning, the sound of tires on gravel reached his ears. Ethan looked out the window and saw a white van pulling up near the gate. The logo on the side read Wildlife Rehabilitation Center. Two people stepped out, a man and a woman, both dressed in khaki uniforms with calm, practiced expressions. They carried gentle voices and clipboards, but to Ethan, they looked like the messengers of something inevitable. He swallowed hard, his throat tight, and turned toward the couch. "Hey, buddy," he said softly, "wake up." Scout blinked awake, stretching and wagging his tail once before padding over to Ethan, The cub's small nose brushed against Ethan's hand, and he let out a quiet whine, sensing the shift in the air, even if he didn't understand it. Ethan crouched down and ruffled the fur on his neck. "You remember how I told you about the wild?" he said quietly, his voice trembling. "About how it's out there waiting for you. Well, looks like today's the day you get to go find it." He picked Scout up and held him close, feeling the familiar warmth and heartbeat against his chest. The rescuers approached slowly, their voices low and kind. "You must be Ethan," the woman said. "Thank you for calling us. You did an incredible thing saving this little one." Ethan nodded wordlessly, unable to speak. "We'll take good care of him," the man added gently. "He'll go to our sanctuary up north, open space, lots of trees. When he's strong enough, we'll see if he can be released into the wild." Ethan forced a small smile. "That's good," he managed. "He deserves that." The woman knelt, opening a soft carrier lined with blankets. "If you'd like, you can put him in yourself," she offered kindly. Ethan nodded and looked down at the cub one last time. "You hear that, Scout? They've got trees waiting for you. Real ones. No cars, no roads, no noise, just sky." He hesitated, his voice breaking slightly. "I'll miss you, buddy." He gently placed Scout inside the carrier. The cub didn't resist. Instead, he turned around and pressed his nose against Ethan's fingers through the mesh. Ethan felt his chest tighten painfully. "You're gonna do great out there," he whispered. "You're strong. You're meant for something bigger than this." The rescuers closed the carrier carefully and carried it toward the van. Ethan stood in the doorway, watching them walk away. Every step they took felt heavier than the last. When they placed the carrier inside and closed the door, the sound of the latch echoed through the quiet yard like the end of a chapter. The engine started, the gravel crunched again, and the van slowly pulled away, dust rising in the sunlight. Ethan watched until it disappeared beyond the bend in the road, the air around him feeling too still, too empty. He stood there for a long time, staring at the road. The house felt hollow without the small sounds, the clicking of claws on the floor, the soft breathing at night, the quiet companionship that had filled the empty spaces of his life. He went back inside and sat on the couch where Scout used to sleep, running his hand over the blanket. The warmth was gone, but the memory wasn't. It clung to him like sunlight that refused to fade. The rest of the day passed in silence. Ethan wandered through his garage, unable to focus on anything. The world looked the same but felt smaller, quieter. He picked up Scout's old bowl, washed it slowly, and placed it on the counter, not ready to throw it away. He walked out to the porch as the afternoon light began to fade, the sky turning from blue to amber. The wind brushed gently through the grass, and for a moment, he could almost imagine Scout racing across the field, tail wagging, head turned toward him as if to say goodbye. Weeks passed. Ethan returned to his usual work of fixing engines, changing tires, helping neighbors, but something had changed in him. He found himself glancing at the road more often, listening for a sound that wasn't there. He still woke up early, half expecting to hear small footsteps or a soft whine. The quiet hurt, but it also reminded him that he had done something selfless. He had given a wild creature another chance at life. Then, one afternoon, an envelope arrived in the mail. It was from the Wildlife Rehabilitation Center. Ethan tore it open, his hands trembling slightly. Inside was a short letter and a photograph. The letter thanked him for his rescue and told him that the cub was thriving. He's strong, healthy, and learning to live among his own kind. The note read, "We named him Scout, just as you did." Ethan's throat tightened as he unfolded the photograph. In the picture, a grown wolf stood on a rocky ridge surrounded by trees. His fur was thick and golden brown, his stance proud and free. The wild light in his eyes was unmistakable. Ethan stared at the photo for a long time, unable to stop the tears that blurred his vision. He traced a finger over the image and whispered, "You made it, boy." That evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky with fire, Ethan took the photo outside and pinned it to the wooden wall of his porch. He sat down on the steps with a quiet smile, looking out toward the line of trees in the distance. The field swayed softly in the wind, and for a moment, he thought he heard a distant howl, faint but clear, carried on the breeze. He closed his eyes and let it wash over him, a sound both sad and beautiful. The sound of freedom itself. When he opened his eyes again, the sky was turning deep orange, and he whispered into the wind, "You're where you're meant to be, Scout, and maybe I am too." And as the last light of day faded over the fields, Ethan felt something he hadn't felt in a long time, peace. Not the peace that comes from keeping something close, but the kind that comes from letting go and knowing you did the right thing. In his heart, he knew that somewhere out there, running wild beneath the open sky, a once-lost cub remembered the man who had stopped his truck one sunny day and changed both of their lives forever.